The drill bit screamed through the last 2 feet of shale, and Jonah Reed felt the bones of the rig shudder up through his boots, so he throttled it down before the pack could decide he was worth the trouble. There were 4 of them, low along the dry wash to the west, watching the way lean things watch when they have not eaten in a long time. Duskrunners, the cordon maps called them. Pack predators, gray as old ash, with jaws that could take a leg off at the hip and eyes set forward like a thing that had never once in its life been prey. Jonah had counted them at first light. Now it was midday and there were 4, and the drought had made them patient instead of bold, which was the only reason he was still standing. He did not reach for the cutter torch braced against the rig frame. He had learned in the first week that reaching for anything fast in the V-Harn reach was a conversation you did not want to start. He kept his hands where they were, one on the throttle bar, one loose at his side, and he watched the pressure gauge instead of the pack, because the gauge was telling him something the whole basin had forgotten how to believe. The needle was climbing. Not the slow bleed of a damp seam. A climb. A hard, glad climb, the kind a sinker feels maybe 3 times in a career, when the bore finally punches through the cap rock and the deep water underneath remembers which way is up. Jonah had drilled dry holes on 4 worlds. He knew the difference between a promise and a lie the way other men knew their own signature. This was a promise. He eased the throttle back up, just enough to clear the last of the shale, and the bit dropped through into nothing and then into everything. And a gout of cold water came up the casing and out the relief port and hit the red dust of the reach for the first time in what the cordon said was 11 years. The sound of it changed the whole valley. He heard the duskrunners come up off their bellies. He did not turn. Water on dry ground makes a sound like nothing else out here, a hiss and a chuckle and a slap, and every living thing in a dead land is tuned to it down in the marrow. He let the port run. He let the water sheet across the hardpan and find the low places and start, stupidly, hopefully, to pool. And he counted, under his breath, the way his father had taught him to count when a thing was going right, and you did not want to jinx it. At 8, the nearest duskrunner walked out of the wash. It came stiff-legged, hackles up, a growl running under it like a motor, and Jonah stood very still and kept counting and did not look at its eyes. It stopped 6 feet from the spreading water. It was starving. He could see the rack of its ribs, the way the hide had gone slack over the shoulder, the crust at the corner of its mouth where thirst had cracked the lip. It looked at the water. It looked at him. It could have crossed that 6 feet in less time than it took him to breathe, and they both knew it. It lowered its head and drank. The other 3 came in one at a time, spaced, watchful, and drank beside the first. And for a while the only sound in the V-Harn reach was 4 apex predators drinking from a puddle. A human had pulled out of the ground, and the human standing over them with his hands empty, counting, so that his voice would not shake. 200 miles east, behind a wall no living thing had crossed westward in 11 years. A Sethari cartographer named Nea Sorrel watched the same event happen on a drone feed and forgot, for a full 4 seconds, to log it. She was young for the post, 3rd rank, assigned to the cordon's Western Survey, because nobody senior wanted a station where the only thing to map was a slow death. The V-Harn Reach was a case study now, taught in the clan academies as the textbook example of a biome past saving. An inland basin the size of a small sea, its aquifer collapsed, its rivers gone to cracked mud, its predator hierarchy compressed by starvation into something the ecologists called a terminal spiral. When a land dies, the prey goes first, and then the predators eat each other, and then the top of the food chain, the great armored V-Harn the Reach was named for, comes to the only water left, which was the seep pools at the base of the cordon wall where the culling guns waited. That was the design. Let the reach fail, let its apexes stagger to the wall to die, thin them out, and in a generation claim the drained basin for grazing land. It was patient, and it was clean, and Nea had helped draw the maps for it without once letting herself think the word it deserved. Now a human stood in the dead center of that basin with a drilling rig and a puddle, and 4 duskrunners were drinking at his feet, instead of tearing him into portions. And the drone's threat assessment overlay had thrown up so many contradictory flags it had simply stopped and shown her a blinking amber query. She had no protocol to answer. "Log it," said the station voice behind her. Overseer Drouse Kale did not come to the Western Survey often. He had come today because a human had done a mad thing 11 days ago, and the odds pool on how many days the human would last had grown large enough to interest a clan lord. Kale was tall even for a Sethari, scaled slate dark across the crest. His authority collar worked in the old bronze that meant land-holding blood. He watched the feed with the particular stillness of a man recalculating a wager. Log the water strike, depth, flow, position, and log the time of death when it comes. He'll draw every predator in 100 miles to that spot, and he has no wall. He struck water at 40 meters, Naya said. Overseer, the survey put the water table at 110, falling. Then the survey was wrong or he was lucky. Kale's tail moved once slow. It changes nothing. A man is not a wall. Water without a wall is bait. He turned to go and paused, and something in the feed held him the way it had held her. The duskrunners had finished drinking. The lead animal had not left. It had lain down. In the open, 6 feet from a human, in the posture a duskrunner takes only inside its own pack, at the center of its own ground when it is safe. "Log that too," Kale said, and his voice had lost a degree of its certainty, and he did not seem to notice, but Naya did. She logged it. Under position and depth and flow, she wrote. In the free text field, the clan cartographers were forbidden to use for anything but coordinates. 4 words she would think about for a long time afterward. The wall is not the water. Jonah shut the rig down at dusk because a running motor in a dark land was a beacon, and beacons in the reach were arguments. He did not need the light anyway. He needed the water to keep coming, and it kept coming. A fat cold quart of it out of the relief port, filling the shallow pan he had scraped that afternoon with a shovel and his boots, and running off south down a fold in the hard pan. He had already decided he would deepen tomorrow into a proper channel. He built a fire from the compressed brick fuel he had hauled in, small, in the lee of the rig, and he ate cold from a tin. And the duskrunners lay at the edge of the firelight and watched him eat and did not come closer and did not leave. He talked to them, not because he thought they understood the words, because his father had done the same on the frontier stations of Cauldry, talking low and steady to the beasts in the pens while he worked. And Jonah had learned young that an animal reads the water in a voice the way it reads the water in the ground, from a long way off, through the marrow, whether it is safe. "You had a hard year," he told the lead animal. It had a notch in its left ear and a way of holding its head that made him think of an old foreman he had worked under, a hard, fair, hungry man. He called it notch in his head because a thing you have named is a thing you will not shoot by reflex. Whole basin had a hard year. That's all right. Water's up now. It'll keep. The cordon had told him he would be dead in a week. The recruiter, a Sethari factor with a soft collar and a hard smile, had actually laughed at him in the clean office 200 miles east when Jonah put the salvage claim on the desk. Anyone could file to work the Viharn Reach. That was the joke of it. The cordon authorities sold the mineral and water rights to the whole basin for a token because everyone knew the basin was a grave, and the deed was worth exactly the paper. And the factor had laughed and stamped it and said, in the flat pity of a man doing a young fool a courtesy, that the cordon did not run recovery operations for bodies west of the wall. Jonah had thanked him for the deed and left. He had not told the factor the thing he knew, which was not a secret, only a thing nobody with a wall had bothered to learn, that a basin does not die from the top down. It dies from the water down. The prey did not starve because the predators ate them. The prey starved because the grass died, and the grass died because the surface water went, and the surface water went because the aquifer had dropped below the old spring lines during a drought cycle that the cordon's own records showed had happened 3 times in the last 1,000 years and reversed every time. The reach was not a corpse. It was a body holding its breath. The aquifer had not collapsed. It had retreated, down past the shallow bores the Sethari knew how to dig, down to the deep water under the cap rock, where it waited for someone stubborn enough and skilled enough to go down and get it and bring it up and give it back. That was a thing humans knew how to do. It was, Jonah thought, maybe the oldest thing humans knew how to do. Before the ships, before the walls, before anyone thought to draw a line on a map and call the far side a grave, a person with a stick and a patient hand, and a knowledge of where water hides had walked into a dry place and made it live. His whole trade was that one act, dressed up in 11 generations of tools. "They think I came here to fight you," he said to Notch. The Duskrunner's ears turned toward him. "I didn't. I came here to dig a well." He slept with the fire between him and the dark, and nothing killed him, and in the morning the water was still coming. The second thing he built was the catchpan, and it nearly cost him his hands. He spent the whole of the next day on it, deepening the scrape into a proper basin lined with the sealant slurry he had hauled in 50-kilo sacks, so the water would pool instead of soaking straight back into the thirsty ground. It was slow, filthy work, on his knees in red mud, and it was while he was elbow-deep in the slurry with his back to the wash that the ground told him he was no longer alone. Not a sound, a silence. The small constant noise of a dry land, wind grit, the tick of cooling stone, the far complaint of carrion birds had stopped, all at once, the way a room stops when something large comes to the door. Jonah took his hands out of the mud slowly and turned around slowly and looked up, and up, at the Viharn. The cordon maps did not do it justice. Nothing could. It stood at the lip of the wash 40 feet away, and it was the size of a freight hauler, 6-limbed, plated in overlapping slabs of horn-gray armor that had gone dull and cracked with the long hunger, and its head was a wedge of old scars and forward-set eyes the deep red of banked coals, and it was looking at the water. It was so thin. That was the thing that stopped his heart and then strangely steadied it. A creature built to be a mountain, worn down to a ridge. Its shoulders stood out like the frame of a wrecked ship. It had come, he understood, to the only water in the reach that was not at the killing wall, and it had found a human kneeling in it. An adult Viharn could have ended him without deciding to. One limb, less than a thought. Jonah stayed on his knees, which put his head lower than the animal's, and he did not run, because you do not run from a thing that eats runners, and he did not reach for the torch, because a torch against that was a joke that would get him killed, and he did the only thing he had ever known to do, which was to talk low and steady and get out of the way of the water. "Go on," he said. "It's yours as much as anybody's. I just brought it up." He got his feet under him without standing tall, and he stepped back from the catchpan, one slow step, then another, giving it the ground, the way you give a big animal the ground when the thing it wants is not you. And the Viharn came down the wash. The earth carried the weight of it up through his boots. It came to the pan and lowered that scarred wedge of a head and drank, and drinking, it closed its coal-red eyes, and Jonah stood 8 feet away with red mud drying on his arms and watched the apex predator of a dead basin drink from a hole he had dug, and understood that he had crossed a line that had nothing to do with the wall 200 miles east. It drank for a long time. When it lifted its head, the water ran off the plates of its jaw and darkened the dust, and it looked at him, really looked, the forward eyes fixing on him with an attention that had weight, that pressed on his skin, and Jonah made himself meet it and not flinch and not challenge, just meet it, one living thing to another over a thing that mattered to them both. Then it turned, unhurried, and climbed the far side of the wash and was gone into the heat shimmer, and the small noises of the land came back one by one, and Jonah discovered he had been holding a breath for what felt like a year and let it out. "All right," he said, to nobody, to the water, to the drying mud on his hands. All right. He went back to the sealant. There was a catchpan to finish. The water was still coming, and the whole basin now knew where it was, and a man with a well and no wall had exactly one thing to trade for his life, and it was not a gun. It was the water, and the water was going to keep coming. On the fourth day, he found the calf. He had gone up the wash at dawn to trace the seepline, looking for the natural fold where he could sink the second bore and double the flow, and he found instead a collapse, a den dug back under a shelf of capped rock, the roof come down, the red dust around it churned and then, days old, gone still. He knew what he was looking at before he understood the details. He had grown up around denning beasts. He knew a birthing scrape when he saw one, and he knew the particular stillness of a place where a mother had not come back. The cordon cull records, when Naya pulled them later at his request through a back channel she would nearly lose her post over, showed that a female viharn had been put down at the western killing wall 9 days before, drawn to the seep pools by the drought, thin enough that the gunners had logged her as terminal and fired without the mandated observation delay. The record did not note that she had been nursing. The cordon did not track that. Why would it? A wall does not ask what the water is for. Jonah heard it before he saw it, a thin, exhausted, furious sound from back under the fallen shelf, the sound of a thing too young to know it was already supposed to be dead and too stubborn to lie down about it. He got on his belly in the dust and worked his way in under the groaning rock, and in the dark at the back of the collapse, he found a young viharn the size of a large dog, plates still soft and pale as new horn, one hind limb pinned under a slab it had not the strength left to shift, and it turned its blunt, starved head toward him and hissed with everything it had left, which was almost nothing. A sensible man would have backed out. An adult viharn had drunk from his pan the day before. A mother viharn does not den alone, and if she came back to this, she would follow his scent to his rig, and there would be no talking low that would fix it. A sensible man knew that a dying thing under a rock in the viharn reach was not a rescue. It was a trap the land set for the soft-hearted. Jonah had never been especially sensible about a hungry thing under a rock. He talked to it the whole time, low and steady, while he found the prybar of a shape in the slab and set his shoulder and moved a stone he had no business moving, and the young viharn hissed, and then, when the weight came off its ruined leg, stopped hissing and just breathed in great shuddering pulls, watching him. He got an arm under it. It weighed as much as a grown man, and it stank of infection, and it did not bite him, and he never afterward could say why, except that maybe a thing that young reads the water in a voice even better than a thing that is old, and there was no killing in his. He carried it down the wash to the water. He was 200 miles from the nearest wall, alone, with a drill, a catchpan, and now a dying apex calf across his arms, and he had a knee-deep pool of cold, clean water pulled out of 11 years of grave, and he knelt down at the edge of it and lowered the young viharn to the mud and cupped his hand and brought the water to its cracked mouth. "Easy," he said. "Easy now, I've got the water, I've got you." It drank from his hand. Behind the wall, 200 miles east, a drone caught the whole of it, and a young cartographer watched a human give water to the calf of a thing her people had spent a generation learning to kill, and she did not log it, because there was no field on the form for what she was looking at, and because her hands, for reasons she did not examine, were not quite steady on the console. The calf lived, which surprised everyone including the calf. Jonah did not have a beast doctor's kit. He had a well sinker's kit, which turned out to be closer than a cordon ecologist would have guessed. He had clean water, which was the whole war right there. He had the flushing pump he used to clear a bore of silt, and he ran it on the lowest pressure over the ruined hind limb until the wound wept clean instead of foul. He had the sealant slurry, sterile in the bag, and a field splint improvised from drill collar and cargo strap. He had the compressed protein meant to keep a working man upright for a month, and a young predator will eat what it is given when the alternative is dying, and it was given, from an open human hand, twice a day at the edge of the water. He named it on the second night, when it stopped hissing at his approach and started instead to make a low burring sound in its chest when he came with the food. A sound he would learn to read the way he read the pressure gauge. A sound that meant the water in his voice had reached all the way to the bottom of it. He called it ket because it was short and because it was the sound the flushing pump made when it primed. A low double knock, ket-ket. And because a thing you have named is a thing you will fight for. And Jonah had already understood without letting himself say it that he was going to fight for this one. By the end of the second week, Ket could stand on the mending leg. By the end of the third, it followed him along the wash while he worked, a limping gray shadow the size of a hound. And the dusk runners, who came to the pan every dawn and dusk now, Notch and his three, and had lately begun to lie up in the shade of the rig through the killing heat of midday as though they had been doing it their whole lives. The dusk runners watched the calf and the human move together and did a thing that Naya, on the drone feed, flagged and then unflagged 3 times before she called her supervisor, and then hung up before he answered, because she did not have the words. They made room. A duskrunner pack, 4 starving apex pack hunters at a water source in a dead land with an unguarded infant of a rival apex species walking past them at 8 feet, and they drew their heads back and let it pass, not from fear. Naya had watched enough reach footage to know duskrunner fear, the flattened ear and the sideways slink. This was not that. This was the thing a low-ranked animal does at a carcass when the pack leader walks up. It was deference. It was hierarchy. And the top of the hierarchy, the thing all 4 of those killers were yielding the ground to, was a soft-skinned biped with a shovel who could not have survived a single one of them in the open for 4 seconds. It doesn't make sense, Naya told the feed quietly, alone in the Western Survey at the 3rd hour of the night. But it did. That was what she could not get past. It made a terrible, elegant sense, and the only reason it looked like a miracle was that her whole people had spent 11 years, and the Cordon Academies 1,000, teaching her to read the Reach's hierarchy off a chart of teeth and mass. Teeth and mass had told them the Viharn was apex. Teeth and mass had told them the human was prey. But the animals in the basin were not reading teeth and mass. They were reading the water. And by that reading, the only reading that had ever actually mattered in a dying land, the apex of the Viharn Reach was the creature the water came out of. She wrote it in the forbidden free text field before she could stop herself. Apex is not the strongest. Apex is the one the others cannot live without. Then she deleted it, because a 3rd-rank cartographer does not write philosophy on a Cordon Survey log, and because if Overseer Kale read it, he would have her posted to a listening station on the ice moons within the week. She deleted it, and she sat in the dark and she watched the human build. Because he was building, now, in earnest, and the building was the thing that changed the shape of everything. The first well had proved the deep water. The second bore, sunk in the washfold Jonah had scouted the morning he found Ket, came in even stronger, and now he had flow enough to stop thinking about a puddle and start thinking about a system. This was the part of the work he loved, the part he was, if he was honest, better at than any beast handler alive. Not the strike, but the plumbing. A single well is a miracle that lasts until the pump fails. A system is a promise you can keep. He built the standpipe first. A gravity tower of stacked catch tanks up the side of the caprock shelf, so that water lifted by the wind pumps in the cool of the night would hold its head and run by daylight without a motor. He built the wind pumps next, 3 of them, from the modular kit that was the single heaviest thing he had hauled in, and the reason the Cordon factor had assumed he was a mineral fool and not a water one, long-bladed, slow-turning, built to lift a thin, steady cord of water 100 feet on nothing but the hot wind that crossed the Reach every afternoon like clockwork. He built the channels, deepening the natural south-running fold into a lined ditch that carried the overflow a half-mile down basin to a second pan, and then a third, stepping the water down the land the way water wants to go, spreading it, slowing it, giving it time to soak. And where the water soaked, on the 11th day after the strike, the ground turned green. Not much. A haze of it, low and grudging, along the wet margins of the channels, the seed of the reach's own grasses, dormant in the hardpan for 11 years, waiting the way the aquifer had waited for someone to bring the water back. But green. In a basin the Cordon Academies taught as a closed case, a dead land, a corpse green, spreading a hand's width a day down the line of a human's ditch. The prey came for the green. They came the way water comes, finding the low way in, first a few and then a current. The long-legged grazers the Sethari called stilt runners, drifting in from the basin's dying margins where they had been eking out the last of the thorn scrub. The burrowing hoppers that had gone down deep to wait out the drought and now came up into the wet grass by the hundred. The slow-armored browsers that ate the channel weed as fast as it grew. Within a month there was a living margin a half-mile long down Jonah's south channel, a green thread of grazers in a red land, and the predators that had been eating each other at the edge of extinction lifted their heads and smelled prey for the first time in years, and turned, all of them, toward the water, toward the human. This was the part the Cordon had not modeled, because the Cordon's model ended at the wall. Jonah had modeled it on the first night, by the small fire talking to Notch. Bring back the water and you bring back the grass. Bring back the grass and you bring back the prey. Bring back the prey and the predators stop starving, and a predator that is not starving is a different animal entirely. Not a desperate thing that will throw its life at anything that moves, but a patient thing, a territorial thing, a thing with the luxury, again, of a hierarchy. And at the top of that hierarchy, in the place teeth and mass could not explain, stood the source. The one the water came out of. The one the whole restored web of the basin now depended on, and, dimly, in the way that even the simplest animal understands the thing that keeps it alive, knew that it depended on. They did not worship him. Jonah would have laughed at the word, and did later, when a Sethari junior officer used it to his face. They deferred to him the way a whole valley of animals will defer to the beaver whose dam made the pond, the way every creature at a desert spring gives way at the water's edge to the thing that, if it left, would take the water with it. It was not love and it was not fear. It was something older and more practical than either, and it was, Jonah thought, the most honest kind of respect there was, the respect of the kept alive for the keeper. He hummed while he worked. He had always hummed, a low, tuneless, four-note thing his father had hummed at the pens on Cauldry, more breath than voice, the sound of a man whose hands were busy and whose mind was quiet. He hummed it running the wind pump linkages, and he hummed it walking the channels at dawn to check the flow. And Ket, pacing at his heel, learned it, and the duskrunners learned it. And one strange gold evening Jonah realized that when he hummed, the animals at the water went still, heads up, ears turned, the whole living margin of the basin pausing to listen to the low four-note sound that meant the keeper was walking his ground and the water was safe. He did not think much of it, it was just the hum. But 200 miles east a cartographer isolated the audio off the drone feed, and cleaned it and played it back, and watched the entire predator population of a restored basin fall silent and orient on a human's toneless four-note breath. And Nea Sorrel, who was a scientist and not a poet, wrote a proper entry in the proper field this time, using the term she would be the first of her people to coin, and the Cordon would later adopt into its ecological doctrine without ever crediting her. The low water song, vocal signal human origin four-note, observed function, hierarchy affirmation across a multi-species predator assemblage, observed effect, cessation of aggression, orientation on source. Recommend further study. Recommend further study. It was the closest thing to a prayer the Cordon forms allowed. Overseer Drouse Kale came back to the Western Survey on the 40th day, and this time he did not come out of idle curiosity, and he did not come to log a death. He came because the survey drone's wide-orbit imaging had, that morning, put a thing on his desk that a clan lord of land-holding blood could not unsee. A photograph of the Viharn Reach from 40 miles up, and down in the dead red center of it, unmistakable, growing, a green thread, and a green thumbprint spreading along a line of new water like a wound healing in reverse. How much, Cale said. He did not sit. He stood over Nea's console with the image on the main plate and his tail held very still, which she had learned was the most dangerous thing his tail did. How much water, flow rate, aquifer draw, all of it. She gave him the numbers. 2 wells, a third being sunk. Flow rising as the man opened the deep aquifer that the cordon's own shallow surveys had missed by 70 meters. Draw well within the recharge rate. The man was not mining the water. He was managing it, taking less than the deep table put back, which meant it was not a spike, not a lucky pocket, but a sustainable yield, which meant the green thumbprint on Cale's photograph was not going to fade in a season. It was going to grow. Nea watched the clan lord look at the image, and she watched him do the arithmetic she had refused to do, and she understood, with a cold drop in her gut, that she had badly misjudged what this had been about from the start. She had thought the cordon fenced the reach to let it die out of caution, because the Viharn were too dangerous to live beside, because a dead basin was safer than a live one. That was the Academy story. But Cale was not looking at the image the way a man looks at a solved danger. He was looking at it the way a man looks at a thing he has already sold. The reclamation charter, Cale said slowly to himself, not to her. Grazing rights to the drained basin. My clan holds it in escrow against the terminal date. When the reach was certified dead, the land reverted to us. 400,000 hectares. He turned his head and his forward eyes. The Sethari were predators too once before the walls and the collars settled on her with a weight she felt in the marrow, the way she had felt the Viharn's weight through the feed. And a human with a salvage deed just made it live again, which means it is no longer eligible for reclamation, which means the charter is void. A pause, long tail utterly still. Do you understand what that human has cost my clan, cartographer? He struck water, Nea said carefully. He didn't know about the charter. The deed he holds is registered, it's legal. The deed grants him mineral and water rights to the basin floor, Cale said. It does not grant him the aquifer beneath it, which is a shared regional resource under cordon law which my clan administers. His tail moved once, and the movement had a decision in it that made her cold. He has done a remarkable thing. I will not pretend otherwise. He found water the whole cordon missed, and he brought a dead land back, alone with his hands in 40 days. It is the most impressive piece of work I have seen in my life. The forward eyes did not blink. And I am going to take it from him. Log the aquifer as a regional resource in dispute, draft the injunction, and send the western wall a readiness order. He was already moving toward the door. A man is not a wall, cartographer. I told you that on the first day. Water without a wall is bait. Let us go and see what it caught. The door closed behind him. Nea sat for a long time in the humming dark of the western survey, looking at the image of the green thumbprint growing in the red, and then she did a thing that would, in the end, decide which side of the wall her whole life came down on. She opened the free text field one more time, and she did not write philosophy, and she did not delete it. She wrote a message, tight and coded, on a back channel a cartographer was not supposed to know how to open, addressed to a salvage deed holder 200 miles west who had no idea a clan lord had just decided to end him. They know about the water, they are coming for it, build faster. The message came in on Jonah's rig set at the 9th hour. A burst of cordon cipher his salvage license was not cleared to receive, and it took him most of an hour to crack it with the trade code primer his father had drilled into him on Cauldry. And when the 4 words resolved on the little amber screen, he read them twice, and then set the handset down and looked out at the water for a while. They know about the water, they are coming for it, build faster. He did not know who had sent it, he would not know for a long time. But he knew what it meant, because he had been half expecting it since the day the drone had first hung over the wash and not left, And because a man does not turn a certified grave into 400,000 hectares of living land without somebody, somewhere, deciding they had lost something by it. He could have run. The rig was mobile, the deed was portable, there were other dry worlds. A sensible man, hearing that a clan lord with a wall and a readiness order had decided to take his well, would have packed the flushing pump and the sealant and been over the horizon before the injunction cleared. Jonah looked at the water. He looked at the green thread running south down his channel, and the grazers in it, and the duskrunners lying up in the rig's shade with their heads on their paws, and Ket, half again the size he'd been a month ago, the mended leg already thickening with new plate, sprawled in the mud at the pan's edge in the boneless sleep of a young thing that has decided, all the way down, that it is safe. He thought about what running would mean. Not for him, for them. Cut the pumps, pull the rig, and the standpipe would run dry in a day, the channels in 2, the green would brown in a week. The prey would drift back to the margins to die, and the predators would turn again on each other and then stagger, one by one, to the killing wall. He would be undoing the only thing he had ever done that felt like the whole reason a person learned his trade. "No," he said out loud to the water. Ket's ear turned. "No, I don't think we'll be doing that." He picked the handset back up and sent 4 words of his own, back down the channel it had come from, to whoever had risked a great deal to warn him. "Then I'll build faster." And he did. The thing the cordon never understood about Jonah Reed, the thing Naya came to understand and Kale never did, was that build faster for a human waterman did not mean build a wall. It meant deepen the thing you have. A wall says stay out. A well says come here. Kale was bringing a wall 200 miles to a place that had already, in 40 days, made every wall in the basin obsolete. And he did not see the difference, and it was going to cost him. Jonah spent the days after the warning doing exactly what he had been doing, only more of it and better. He sank the 3rd bore and brought it in, and the flow rose again. He built a 4th wind pump and a 2nd standpipe, and doubled the head of water he could hold against a dry day. He lined 2 more channels and stepped the water further south and west, so the green thumbprint on Kale's photographs stopped being a thumbprint and started being a hand. He built a springhouse over the main wellhead, a low, thick-walled structure of poured slurrycrete, half sunk into the cap rock, not as a fort but as a plumbing choice to keep the deep water cool and clean, and to house the manifold where all the flow of the whole system came together before it ran out to the basin. It was, though he did not build it to be, the one place in the reach where a person could put his back to a wall and hold. He noticed that. He filed it away. He kept building. And the basin answered him, species by species, in a widening ring of deference that Naya tracked from the Western Survey with the growing, guilty exhilaration of a scientist watching a theory she was not supposed to have come true. The shroud came on the 50th day. They were the basin's 3rd apex, the one the cordon feared most because it was the one that could get over a wall. Gliding ambush predators that denned in the high caprock scarps and dropped on prey from the thermals on membranes of gray skin stretched between long clawed limbs, silent, from above. They had been all but gone. A gliding hunter needs prey it can see from height, and there had been nothing to see for 11 years but red dust and each other. Now there was a half-mile of grazers in green grass along a human's channel, and the shroud came down out of the scarps to hunt it. And the first time one folded its membranes and dropped toward the living margin, Jonah looked up from the standpipe linkage and saw the shadow coming and did the only thing he knew, which was to keep his hands slow and hum the 4 low notes and not run. The shroud pulled out of its dive. Naya watched it on the feed and stopped breathing. The animal had been committed, wings folded, a stone falling on a killing line, and 40 feet up it threw its membranes wide and hauled itself sideways off the human and the water and beat back up to the scarp, and it screamed once, the long falling shriek of a shroud, but it did not stoop again. It circled. It watched. And that evening it came down to the pan on foot, awkward on its folded wings the way a gliding thing always is on the ground, and it drank at the water's edge 30 feet from a duskrunner and 40 feet from a human, and none of the three of them so much as bared a tooth, because they were all now animals of the same water, and the water had a keeper, and the keeper was humming. "That's a third apex," Nea told her supervisor, who had finally answered, and who was 3 ranks above her and had not been west of the wall in a decade. "Duskrunner v. Harn Shrauk. 3 separate apex predators, 3 separate hunting strategies, 3 species that have never in the record shared a range without killing each other, sharing a single water source. Peacefully, under a human. Sir, this isn't taming. You can't tame 3 apexes at once. It's not a thing that exists. This is a violation of a regional resource statute," her supervisor said, "and a clan lord with land-holding blood has filed an injunction, and your job, cartographer, is to log positions and stay out of clan business. Is that understood?" "Understood," Nea said, and logged the Shrauk's position, and did not stay out of clan business, and sent a second coded burst west that night with a schematic of the cordon readiness order she had no clearance to have copied. Ket grew. That was the thing Jonah watched more closely than the wells. In the end, though he'd never have admitted to a cordon ecologist that he watched anything more closely than the wells. The calf that had weighed as much as a man and hissed at him from under a fallen rock was, by the 60th day, the size of a draft animal, plated in new gray horn that had come in clean and hard over the healed leg, and it walked at his heel through the greening basin like a shadow that had learned to love the thing that cast it. It was not tame. Jonah was careful in his own head to keep that straight, because a man who forgets that a thing is wild is a man who gets killed by the thing he loves. Ket hunted its own meat now, gone for a day at a time into the margins after the still trunners, coming back with the particular heavy contentment of a well-fed predator to lie in the mud at the pan and burr its low chest sound at him. It could have killed him at any moment after the 40th day, when it came into its strength. A young Viharn in its second season is a killing engine that outweighs 6 men. It did not, and the reason it did not was not that Jonah had broken it or trained it or bent it to his hand. He hadn't. He had, instead, done the one thing that no Sethari with a wall had ever thought to do for a Viharn. He had been, from the first hour, the water. He had pulled it out from under a rock and given it the water from his own hand and said, "Easy, I've got you." And it had grown up in a world where the human was not the enemy at the wall but the source at the spring. And so it read him the way the whole basin read him, as the top of the only hierarchy that had ever kept anything in the reach alive. And where Ket went, the deference of the young followed. Because Ket was, Jonah slowly understood, becoming something in the basin's restored order, a second-rank thing, a lieutenant, the largest and best-fed young Viharn in a range that was suddenly full of recovering Viharn, and the other young came to the water and saw Ket lie down at the human's feet and burr, and they learned it the way young things learn everything, by watching. By the 70th day there were 11 Viharn coming to Jonah's water, 5 of them young, and the 5 young had all, one by one, taken up the posture Ket took, the head drawn back, the ground given at the water's edge when the humming man walked by. The old ones were harder. They came, the grown Viharn, the ones that had been apex of the whole reach before the drought broke the hierarchy. They came to the water because they had to, because it was the only water, and they drank and they gave the human room the way the Viharn on the 4th day had given him room, out of the practical respect of the kept alive for the keeper. But they did not lie down. They did not burr. They watched him with the coal-red forward eyes and the weight in them, and they kept their own counsel, and Jonah gave them their distance and did not push it, because you do not push a mountain. Except one. She came on the 80th day, at dusk, down the main wash, and Jonah knew her before she reached the water the way you know the largest thing in any room the instant it enters. She was old. Her plates were scarred and dark and worn to the underhorn along the ridges of her back, and one of her forward eyes was clouded to milk, and she moved with the terrible, unhurried economy of a thing that has been the biggest and the oldest and the most dangerous in its whole world for longer than a human lifetime, and has never once, in all that time, had reason to move quickly for anything. The whole basin felt her come. The duskrunners rose and drew off to a respectful distance. The young Viharn at the pan, Ket among them, stood and backed away, heads low, giving her the water, because whatever the human was to them, she was the old apex, the matriarch, the thing their instinct had bowed to since before the human came. She came to the pan and she drank, and Jonah stood by the spring-house with his hands empty and his hum stilled in his throat, because there are things you do not hum at, and he waited to see what the oldest and largest predator in a restored world would decide he was. The matriarch drank for a long time, and when she was done she did not leave, and she did not lie down, and she did not give Jonah the polite distance the other old ones gave. She turned that scarred wedge of a head, and she came across the wet ground toward the spring-house, toward him, slow, unhurried, 20 tons of the oldest apex in the world walking straight at a man with empty hands, and Jonah understood that he was being decided about, and that there was nothing he could build in the next 30 seconds that would change the verdict, so he stopped thinking about building and simply stood. She stopped when her head was an arm's length from his. He could feel the heat of her breath, smell the old blood and the horn and the deep earth reek of a thing that had never in its life been indoors. The clouded eye stared past him. The good eye, the coal-red one, fixed on him with that pressing weight, and it went down him and up him, reading him, not his size, not his teeth. He had neither worth reading the thing the whole basin read, the water in him, the keeper in him, and Jonah made himself breathe slow and meet the good eye and not flinch and not challenge. One old thing to a young one, over the water that ran cool and endless out of the spring-house at their backs. Then the matriarch lowered her head. It was not a bow. Jonah would be angry later at the Sethari who called it a bow, because a bow is a small ceremonious thing and this was neither. She lowered the great scarred head until the wedge of it was below the level of his chest, until a man could have set his hand flat on the crown of it, and she held it there, and she let out a long, slow breath that stirred the dust at his feet, and every animal in the basin, the duskrunners at their distance, the young Viharn drawn back from the pan, the shrouk on the scarp, Ket standing rigid in the mud. Every one of them watched the oldest apex of the Viharn reach lower her head to the human at the spring, and took the lesson, the way animals take the deepest lessons, all at once and forever. Jonah did not touch her. It would have been the wrong thing, and some old frontier sense told him so, the same sense that had kept his hand off the torch on the 4th day. He simply stood, and let her hold the lowered head as long as she wanted to hold it, and when at last she raised it and turned and walked back up the wash into the dark, he let out the breath he had been holding and found that his eyes were stinging, and he told himself it was the dust. That was the old female, Nea said into the recorder at the Western Survey, alone at the 3rd hour of the night, watching it over and over. Her voice was not steady and she had stopped pretending to herself that it was. The one the pre-collapse surveys tagged as the range matriarch, estimated age past 100 years. She has killed, in the record, 3 culling teams and a cordon gunship. And she stopped the recorder. Some things a cartographer does not put in a cordon file, because the file belongs to the cordon, and the cordon was going to send a wall 200 miles to break the thing she was looking at, and she was not, she realized in that dark hour, going to help them do it. She requested a transfer to the field. She filed it that night, a routine ground-truthing survey, a cartographer's right, to verify the drone imaging against physical observation of the Western Reach. It was the kind of request that got rubber-stamped in ordinary times because nobody wanted the Western posting. It got flagged instead, and held, and 3 days later Overseer Drouse Kale himself approved it, personally, with a note she read 4 times trying to find the trap in it. Approved. The cartographer should see the site with her own eyes. Understanding the asset improves the recovery. DK. She should have known then. the asset. He was not calling it a violation anymore, or a bait, or a dead man walking. He was calling it an asset. Cale had looked at 80 days of drone feed and done a different arithmetic than the injunction, and the new arithmetic was worse, and it was going to take Nea standing in the green with the wind pumps turning over her head to understand just how much worse. Cale assembled his force at the western wall over the 90th and 100th days, and he did not call it a force. He called it a recovery operation, and he was careful, because a clan lord of land-holding blood does not survive to old age by being careless with the law. He had the injunction. The aquifer declared a regional resource in dispute. The humans draw upon it enjoined pending adjudication. He had the readiness order, 200 cordon regulars, the culling teams reassigned from the western wall, the heavy machines, not war machines, nothing so crude but reclamation machines, boring rigs and pumping stations and pipe, because Cale had understood the thing that made him more dangerous than any warlord in the Reach's history. He was not coming to destroy the water, he was coming to take it. The plan, as Nea pieced it together from the readiness order she had copied and the manifest she had no business reading, was elegant, and it was legal, and it was going to work. The recovery operation would advance to the basin under the authority of the injunction. It would seize the wellheads, not damage them, seize them, place them under cordon administration as the disputed regional resource they had been declared. It would connect Cale's own pumping stations and pipe and begin drawing the deep aquifer eastward, to the clan lands, where a water this size was worth more than the 400,000 hectares of grazing the charter had lost. And the human would be removed, gently, lawfully, as an enjoined party in violation, escorted back over the wall with his salvage deed intact and worthless, because a deed to the basin floor is worth nothing when the clan controls the water beneath it. It was, Nea thought, staring at the manifest, the cruelest thing she had ever seen designed, precisely because there was no cruelty in it anywhere she could point to. Cale was not going to kill the man. Cale was going to do something the man would find worse than killing. He was going to take the water and let the human watch from the far side of the wall, as the cordon pumps drew it east, and the green browned and the prey drifted back to the margins, and the predators turned again on each other and staggered, one by one, to the killing wall. He was going to make the keeper watch the thing he had kept alive die a second time, slower, on purpose, and there would be nothing in any court in the cordon that the human could point to and call a crime. "He'll fight," Nea said to Cale on the 101st day, when the recovery column was staged at the wall and she had been ordered to accompany it as ground truth cartographer, which she understood now was not an approval but a leash. "The human, when you take the wells, he didn't do this to hand it over. He'll fight." "With what?" Cale was watching the column form up on the drone plate, the boring rigs and the pipe carriers and the 200 regulars in the amber dust. He was calm. He had been calm the whole time, and the calm was the worst of it. "He has a shovel and a drill and a crippled beast he raised from a cull-orphaned. We have 200 trained regulars and the law. He is one man cartographer. One man alone, who did a remarkable thing, and now a clan is going to take it, because that is what happens to remarkable things done by one man alone. It has always been what happens." He looked at her, and there was, she thought, something almost like regret in the good eye, the Sethari eye, the one that had been a predator's eye before the walls and the collars. "You admire him. I understand it. I admire him too. Admiration is not a strategy. Log the column's departure." Nea logged it, and she did the last thing, the thing that would end her career, and she was fairly sure, put her over the wall on the wrong side of it for the rest of her life. She sent a third burst west, the longest one yet, everything she had, the column, the 200, the machines, the plan to take the water and not the man, the whole cold legal machine of it. And at the end, because she was a scientist and not a poet and did not know how else to say it, she wrote, "He is not coming to kill you. He is coming to take the water and make you watch it die. Do not let him near the wells. I am with the column. I am the one who has been warning you. I am sorry it is not more." Jonah read the third burst at the springhouse manifold, with Ket asleep in the mud and the wind pumps turning slow against a sky going gold toward evening, and he read it twice, and then he sat down on the cool, slurry-crete lip of the wellhead and looked out at the thing he had built. The green ran south and west as far as he could see now, 110 days of water spread across a dead land, and in the green there were grazers in the hundreds and predators in the tens, 3 apexes and their young and all the small hungry things between. A whole living web hung on the cord of deep water he had pulled up out of the grave and given back. He had not built a wall. He had built the opposite of a wall. And a man was coming with 200 regulars, and the law to seize the water and let the man watch it die. And the man who was coming was not wrong that Jonah had a shovel and a drill and 1 crippled beast, and that he was 1 man alone. Except that he was not, and it had taken him 110 days, and a stranger's warning to understand the whole size of the thing he had done. He was not 1 man alone. He had never, since the 4th day, been 1 man alone. He was the keeper of the only water in a basin the size of a small sea, and every predator in it 3 apexes, the matriarch who had lowered her head, the young that had learned deference from Ket, the duskrunners, the shrouk, all of them. Every one of them read him as the top of the only hierarchy that had ever kept anything in the reach alive, and would read anyone who came to take the water from him as exactly what such a person was. A rival apex, come to the water to challenge the keeper. Jonah did not want to fight. He had meant it the first night talking to Notch. He had not come to fight anyone. He had come to dig a well. But he understood, sitting on the cool lip of the wellhead in the gold light with the message glowing on the little screen, that the choice was not his and never had been, not really. That the moment he pulled the first water up and the first duskrunner lay down in the open, he had stopped being a man alone and become a thing with a basin behind him, and that a clan lord who did not understand the difference between a wall and a well was about to walk 200 regulars into the middle of it. Ket, he said. The young Viharn lifted its blunt head from the mud, ears turning, the low burr starting in its chest. It was the size of a draft animal now and still growing, and its plates had come in hard and gray and clean. We've got company coming. Day, maybe 2. He stood, and he did not hum, because it was not the time for the hum, and he looked east down the long green line of his channels toward the wall 200 miles away where a column was forming in the dust. Best we get the water ready. He did not mean ready to fight. He meant ready to run, full standpipes, full pans, every tank in the system at its head, the whole basin watered to the brim, so that whatever happened at the wells, the green would hold a few days longer than a clan lord expected. He worked through the night by the light of the pumps, topping every tank, and Ket paced the perimeter of the springhouse, and out in the dark the duskrunners rose from the rig's shade and drew in close, and the shrouk came down off the scarps to the low ground, and the young Viharn gathered at the water, and the matriarch Jonah felt her before he saw her, the whole basin bending toward the weight of her. The matriarch came down the main wash and lay down at last, for the first time at the edge of the human's light, and did not leave. The basin knew. Before the man on the far side of the wall had given the order to advance, the whole living reach had felt the shape of what was coming, the way it had felt every change in the water for 110 days, and it had done the thing a healthy hierarchy does when a rival comes to the water. It gathered behind the keeper. The recovery column crossed into the western reach at mid-morning on the 113th day, and Nea Sorrel, riding in the third vehicle with her survey kit and a cartographer's leash, watched the dead land she had mapped for 2 years turn green through the dust-scarred window, and put her hand flat against the glass without meaning to. She had known the numbers. She had logged the flow rates and the draw and the recharge. She had traced the channels on the imaging and measured the spread of the thumbprint a hand's width a day. She had thought she understood what the human had done. She had understood nothing. Numbers are a wall between you and a thing, and it was not until the column dropped down the last dead grade and the basin opened out in front of her that the wall came down and she saw it whole. A living valley in the center of a grave, green threads webbing south and west off a bright silver spine of standpipes and turning pumps. Grazers scattered across the wet margins in the hundreds. The air over the water thick with the small flying things that had not been seen in the reach in 11 years. And everywhere, at the edges of the green, unhurried, unafraid, the shapes of the great predators lying up in the day heat like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. Because someone had given it back to them. "Slow the column," Cale said from the lead vehicle on the open channel. His voice had a thing in it Naya had not heard before, and it took her a moment to name it, and when she named it her stomach dropped because it was hunger. "Look at it. Look at what one man did with a drill." A pause. "It will be the finest land my clan has ever held. Advance to the wellheads. Recovery teams to the primary springhouse. Culling teams hold at the green line. Nothing fires unless a beast commits. We are not here to make martyrs. We are here to take the water." The column ground forward into the green, 200 regulars and the boring rigs and the pipe carriers, and the great predators at the margins lifted their heads and watched it come, and did not move. And the not moving was so much worse than a charge that Naya heard the regular beside her release the safety on his culling gun with a hand that was not quite steady. They had come expecting a dead land and one man. They had crossed into a living one, and the living one was watching them, and every soldier in that column felt the thing Naya felt, the thing the drone feed could never carry, that they were not the apex here. That they had walked, 200 strong, with their machines and their law, into a place that already had a hierarchy, and were about to find out where they ranked in it. The first probe went to the northern wellhead, and Jonah led it. He watched it from the springhouse through the field glasses, a recovery team of a dozen, peeling off the column, advancing on the third bore where the wind pump turned slow over the standpipe. Their movements careful, professional. The movements of people who have been told this is a legal seizure and not a fight. They reached the wellhead. They began, methodically, to clamp the cordon administration seals to the manifold, to run their own gauge onto his flow, to do the paperwork of theft with wrenches. The duskrunners took them at the water. Not in blood. That was the thing Jonah had counted on, the thing Cale in all his cold arithmetic had never once factored, because Cale read predators off a chart of teeth and mass, and had never in his life watched a healthy pack work a rival away from a spring. The duskrunners did not charge the recovery team. They appeared all at once out of the grass, the way a pack appears, Notch and his 3 and the 6 others that ran with them now that the basin was fed. 10 gray killers standing in a loose ring around a dozen Sethari regulars at the wellhead, hackles up, that motor growl running under all of them, close, patient, absolutely silent otherwise. Not attacking, surrounding. Saying in the oldest language there is, "This water has a keeper and you are not him." And every regular in that team knew, in the marrow, in the place below training and below law, that if one of them so much as reached for a gun the ring would close, and there would not be enough left to escort back over the wall. The recovery team held very still. Then, one wrench at a time, hands open and slow, they backed away from the wellhead, and the ring of duskrunners opened to let them go, and closed again behind them around the water, and the cordon administration seals lay in the mud where they had dropped them. "They wouldn't fire," Cale said on the channel, flat, recalculating. "Why wouldn't they fire?" "Because the beasts didn't attack," Naya said before she could stop herself. "Overseer, they can't fire. Your own rules of engagement, nothing fires unless a beast commits. And the beasts aren't committing, they're just," she searched for the word and found the only one that fit. "They're escorting them out. The way you'd walk a trespasser off your land. They're not going to give your gunners a reason. He built that too. Don't you see it? He built a defense that never throws the first blow so your law can't touch it." There was a silence on the channel. When Cale spoke again the comm had a crack in it, thin, the first she had heard. "Then we advance all teams at once," he said, "to every wellhead. They cannot ring 200 men. Advance the whole column into the green. Take every head at once." Nea closed her eyes. She had been afraid of exactly this, that Kale would stop being careful, that the cold, clever man who had designed a bloodless theft would, when the theft would not go, reach for mass instead. 200 regulars into the green all at once. The rules of engagement said nothing fires unless a beast commits, but 200 frightened soldiers in the middle of a valley full of apex predators is not a thing that holds to rules of engagement. Someone would fire. And when someone fired, the basin would answer, and it would not answer in escorts. Overseer, she said, if you push the whole column in, someone panics, someone fires, and then it isn't a seizure anymore. It's a slaughter on both sides. You'll lose regulars. You'll turn a recovery operation into a massacre in front of your own drone feed, and the man you're taking it from will be able to say, truthfully, that the cordon walked 200 armed troops into a settled range and started shooting. That's not the land your clan wants. That's a war crime with your name on the order. Another silence, longer. Then what do you suggest, cartographer? Kale said, and there was no warmth in it at all now, since you seem to understand the enemy so well. He's one man, Nea said, and hated herself a little for using Kale's own words, but they were the way in. You've said it 100 times. It's not the beasts that hold the water, it's him. The beasts do what they do because he's there, because he's the keeper, so don't fight the beasts. You can't fight the beasts. Go to the keeper. Go to the spring house under a flag, you and a small escort, and talk to the one man, offer him something. He didn't do this to hold a fort. He did it to keep the water running. Give him a way to keep it running and keep his skin, and maybe he takes it and you get the water without a single shot on the feed. She opened her eyes. It's the only version of this where you win clean, and you like to win clean. I've watched you do it for 2 years. It was, she would think later, the best lie she ever told, because every word of it was true, and she meant it for the opposite of what Kale would use it for. She wanted him at the spring house. She wanted him off the mass advance and up at the one place in the basin where a man could put his back to a wall and hold, in front of the keeper and the matriarch and the whole gathered reach. Because she had a suspicion she had not put into any log, a suspicion about what the basin would do if the rival apex came. Not with 200 faceless regulars, but himself, to the water, to challenge the keeper to his face. A flag and a small escort, Kale said slowly. She could hear him turning it over, seeing the clean win in it, the feed showing a clanlord parley instead of a massacre. Seeing, she was sure, himself standing over the beaten keeper offering terms. Vanity is a lever, and she had found his. Yes, hold the column at the green line. Culling teams ready but weapons safed. I'll take 12 and a flag to the spring house and speak to the man myself. A pause and the old certainty flowing back into his voice, the certainty that had drawn a column 200 miles. One man will always take terms over death, cartographer. That is the whole of history. You come with me. You wanted to see the asset. Come and watch me acquire it. They came up the last green mile to the spring house on foot. Under a flag, 13 Sethari in the dusk gold light of late afternoon. Kale in his bronze landholder's collar with his tail held very still, 12 regulars with weapons safed and shoulders that would not quite square, and Nea at the back with her survey kit and her heart going like the flushing pump, and the whole reach watched them come. That was the thing that broke the regulars' nerve on the walk, and Nea watched it break, one soldier at a time. The predators did not attack, they gathered. Along both sides of the green mile, in the grass and on the low rises, the great beasts of the Viharn reach rose from the day heat and turned and paced the parley in, unhurried, silent, matching the Sethari stride for stride at 40 feet, duskrunners in their gray tens, Shrouk hunched and folded on the high ground, and the Viharn, the young that had learned from Ket and the old that had learned from the drought. A dozen armored mountains drifting through the grass on either side of the flag. And every single one of them watching the 13 Sethari with the flat forward attention of a thing that has already decided you do not belong at its water, and is only waiting to see what its keeper wants done about it. By the time they reached the spring house, 3 of Kale's 12 regulars were shaking so badly they could barely hold formation, and Kale himself, Nea saw, had stopped holding his tail still by will and started holding it still by fear, and did not know the difference showed. Jonah Reed was waiting for them at the wellhead. He did not look like much. Nea had built him so large in her mind over 113 days, the keeper, the maker of water, the human the matriarch had bowed to, that the actual man was a small shock. Young, ordinary, sun-dark and dust-grimed, in stained work coveralls with the sleeves shoved up over forearms roped with the muscle of a laboring trade, a socket wrench still in one hand because he had been working when they came, because he was always working. He was not armed. He was not posed. He stood at the cool lip of the springhouse wellhead with the water running out of it behind him, and a young V-harn the size of a draft animal at his hip. Ket. She knew it had to be Ket, the cull-orphaned grown, and behind Ket, filling the wash, lying in the grass standing among the standpipes, was the whole gathered weight of the basin, and at the center of it nearest the man, her scarred head raised and her one good eye fixed on the 13 who had come to take the water, the old matriarch. Kale stopped 20 feet from the man. The flag hung slack in the still gold air. And Nea, watching from the back with her heart in her throat, saw the clan lord look at the ordinary young human at the wellhead, and then at the 20 tons of old apex beside him and the 100 armored tons behind. And she saw the exact moment the cold, clever arithmetic that had drawn a column 200 miles finally arrived at the one sum it had refused, all along, to add. He was not the apex here. He never had been. Kale recovered fast. Nea had to give him that. A lesser man would have run, and a wiser one might have, but Drouse Kale had held land against the V-harn for a long time, and he found the bottom of his nerve and stood on it and made himself speak as though the 100 armored tons behind the human were livestock and not judges. "You are Jonah Reed," he said. "Salvage deed holder. You have done a remarkable thing here. I want you to understand that I know it, that I am not a fool who came expecting to find a squatter and a hole in the ground. You found water the whole cordon missed. You brought a dead basin back in 100 days alone. In the history of my clan, which is a long history, there has been nothing like it. I mean that." Jonah looked at him. He did not say anything. He turned the socket wrench once in his hand, an idle workman's motion, and behind him the water ran out of the springhouse with a sound like the whole valley breathing, and he waited. "But the water is not yours," Kale said. "The basin floor is yours. Your deed is good for that, and I will not touch it. The aquifer beneath it is a regional resource under cordon law, and cordon law is administered by my clan, and I hold an injunction, lawfully filed and lawfully granted, enjoining your draw upon it pending adjudication that will take years and that you will lose." He let that settle. "I'm not here to kill you, Reed. I want to be very clear on that because I think men have been telling you for 100 days that the reach would kill you, and it did not, and now you think you are past killing. You are not past this. This is worse than killing, and I want you to see the whole of it before you choose because I think you are a man who would rather see the whole of a thing." He spread his hands, reasonable, terrible. "I am going to take the water. My teams will seal your wellheads and connect my pumps and draw this aquifer east to my clan lands, where a water this size is worth more than any grazing charter. And you I will escort over the wall, alive, unharmed, with your worthless deed in your hand, and you will stand on the far side of it and watch over a season, as the pumps draw the water east and the green you made goes brown, and the animals you saved starve back down to the killing wall, one at a time, exactly as they would have without you. I will make you watch your miracle die slowly and on purpose, and there is not a court in the cordon that can call it a crime, because every part of it is legal, and you have no standing, and you are one man alone." It was, Nea thought, the cruelest speech she had ever heard, and it was calculated to the last syllable to break a proud man, to strip him of the fight by showing him a wall he could not climb, a loss he could not avenge, a theft with no throat to put a hand to. She had watched Kale break men this way before in cleaner rooms over smaller things. She watched him do it now, and she watched the human's face, and the human's face did not change. Jonah Reed looked at the clanlord for a long moment. Then he did the last thing anyone in that gold and silent standoff expected. He set the socket wrench down on the lip of the wellhead gently, so it would not scratch the crete, and he crouched, and he cupped his hand under the running water, and he drank from it unhurried, the way a man drinks at his own well at the end of a working day. And then he stood and wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist, and spoke for the first time, low and steady, in a voice that carried in the still air, not because he raised it, but because everything else in that valley had gone quiet to hear him. "You keep saying I'm one man alone," Jonah said. "You've said it 3 times now. I think you need it to be true, so I'll tell you the thing you got wrong, because you came a long way and you did your reading and you got almost all of it right, and it seems a shame for you to walk into this having missed just the one thing." He looked around the gathered basin, unhurried, at the duskrunners and the shrouk and the young Viharn and the matriarch, and then back at Kale. "You read these animals off a chart, teeth and mass. So you looked at me, no teeth, no mass, and you did the arithmetic and got prey. And then when they didn't eat me, you got tamed, because those are the only 2 boxes your chart has. But they never read me off teeth and mass. There's no teeth and mass out here. There's only water. And by the only measure that's ever kept a single thing alive in this basin, I'm not the weakest thing at this spring." He said it without heat, without a boast in it anywhere, a plain man stating a plain fact about his trade. "I'm the apex, because I'm the one the water comes out of, and you just walked into my range with an armed column and told me to my face you've come to take the water." He picked the wrench back up. It was not a threat. It was a man getting back to work. "They understood that part just fine," Jonah said. "You should ask your soldiers how the walk-in felt." Kale's tail moved, once, and Nea saw the crack in the comm widen into something the clanlord could no longer hold shut, because Jonah had done to him precisely what Kale had come to do to Jonah, shown him the whole of a thing, all at once, the thing he had refused to add. Kale had come to a settled range and challenged the keeper for the water in front of the whole gathered reach, and there was only ever one way a hierarchy answers that, and it had nothing to do with law. "Seal the wellhead," Kale said. His voice had gone tight and high. He was not looking at the human anymore. He was looking at the matriarch, and the matriarch was looking at him. "Regulars, seal the—" The matriarch stood up. She had been lying in the wash, the great scarred bulk of her, and she stood, and the standing of her was the loudest thing that had happened all day, though it made almost no sound at all. 20 tons of the oldest apex in the world rising to its feet at the challenge to its keeper's water, and every other beast in that valley stood with her, the whole 100 armored tons of the gathered reach coming up off the ground at once, and the sound they made was not a roar. It was worse than a roar. It was the low, rolling motor growl of the duskrunners and the deep chest thunder of the Viharn and the falling shriek of the shrouk all together, all at once, a wall of sound rising off the green, and the flag fell out of the hand of the regular who had been holding it because his hands had stopped working, and 3 of Kale's 12 turned and ran, openly, back down the green mile toward the column, and the beasts let them run, because the beasts were not interested in the ones who fled the water. They were interested in the one who had come to take it. "Call it off," Nea said. She had not meant to speak. She was at Kale's shoulder, and she had her hand on his arm on the bronze collar's edge, gripping it. "Overseer, call it off. Right now before it." "Fire," Kale said, to the culling teams 200 miles of nerve away at the green line, on the open channel, his voice cracking all the way through now. "All teams fire, clear the—" Jonah Reed whistled. It was not the hum. Nea had heard the hum on the feed 100 times, the low 4-note breath, the low water song, and this was not that. This was a single sharp high note, 2-part, a working man's call across a paddock, the sound a keeper makes to a beast that already knows its name, and it cut across Kale's order and across the wall of growl and across the whole Gold Valley, and every predator in the Viharn reach moved on it at once. They did not move toward the human. They moved away from him. That was the thing Naya would spend the rest of her life trying to make people understand. The thing the drone feed showed, and no one who had not stood in it could ever quite believe. That the beasts did not charge past their keeper at the enemy. At the whistle, the whole gathered reach drew back and away from Jonah Reed, opening a wide, clean lane around him and the spring house and the water, deferring, giving him the ground, the way the Duskrunner had given him the ground on the first day, the way the matriarch had lowered her head, clearing back to leave the keeper standing alone and untouched at the center of his own range. And closing, as they cleared, into a ring around the 12 Sethari who had come to take the water. The ring closed the way weather closes, without hurry and without any possibility of stopping it. The 9 regulars who had not run went down not under teeth, but under the plain arithmetic of it, 9 Sethari with safed weapons in the center of a shrinking circle of 3 apex species, and every one of them made, in the same half-second, the only choice a living thing can make in that circle, which is to stop being a threat as fast and as completely as possible. They dropped their weapons. They went to their knees in the wet grass with their hands spread and their crests flat and their throats low, doing with their whole bodies the thing the Duskrunner had done at the water on the first day, the thing the matriarch had done at the wellhead, submission, total and instant and instinctive, the surrender a lesser predator makes to a greater one when the greater one has decided, and there is no fight left worth having. They were culling team veterans. They had put down Viharn at the wall for years. And in the center of the ring, with the growl rolling over them and the great scarred heads lowering toward them, they knelt in the grass and shook and did not so much as reach for the guns at their knees, because the oldest part of them, the part below the training and below the collar and below the law, knew exactly where it ranked, and it ranked below the water. Drouse Kale did not kneel. Naya would remember that afterward, and she was never able to decide whether it was the last of his courage or the last of his vanity, and in the end she thought it was both, because in a man like Kale they had always been the same thing. He stood in the closing ring in his bronze landholder's collar with his tail lashing now, all pretense of stillness gone, and he faced the matriarch as she came, 20 tons of old apex with the coal-red eye and the clouded one, come across the wet ground to answer the rival who had walked into her range and challenged her keeper, and Kale drew the sidearm he was not supposed to be carrying under a flag and leveled it at the great scarred head, and Naya, 3 feet away, heard him say, very quietly. In the clan tongue, the words a Sethari says only once at the end. He did not fire, he never got to fire. Jonah Reed whistled again. The same 2-part note, sharp across the gold air, and the whole closing weight of the reach stopped. Stopped the matriarch a single stride from the clan lord, her head lowered, her breath moving the dust off his boots, the ring frozen around the 9 kneeling regulars, the Duskrunners rigid, the Shrouk half-mantled, the young Viharn stone-still in the grass, the entire gathered basin arrested in the instant before the answer it had every right and every instinct to give, held there, quivering, by a single high note from an ordinary man at a wellhead. "That's enough," Jonah said, into the silence, not loud. "Ket, easy, all of you. Easy now." He said it the way he had said it to a dying calf under a rock 100 days before, low and steady, the water in his voice reaching all the way to the bottom of every animal in that valley. And one by one, grudging, the great heads came up and the growl fell away and the ring loosened. And the matriarch, a single stride from the kill she had come to make, drew back her head and turned and gave the ground. To the human, not to Kale. She turned from Kale as from something beneath her notice and gave the ground to the keeper, and the whole basin followed her, the beasts of the Viharn reach drawing back off their kneeling prey and settling once more into the grass, and the standpipe shade, watchful, unhurried, waiting to see what their keeper wanted done with the ones who had come to take the water. And Drouse Kale stood alone in the center of a cleared and silent circle with a drawn gun in his hand, and 9 of his own regulars kneeling in surrender at his feet, and understood, in front of the drone feed that was carrying every second of it back over the wall to the whole waiting cordon, that he had just been spared. That the ordinary young human he had come to break had, with a whistle, called an apex predator off his throat a stride before it closed. That his life, his clan lord's life, was a thing that now belonged to the man he had walked 200 miles to destroy, and had been handed back to him as one hands a coin to a beggar, because the keeper had not thought it worth the taking. There is no wound a clan can survive worse than that one. Kale had come to make the human watch his miracle die slowly and on purpose. Instead, the whole cordon had watched a clan lord of land-holding blood saved from the beasts by the mercy of a squatter with a socket wrench, and there is not enough water in any aquifer to wash that off a name. "Pick up your soldiers," Jonah said. He had bent and cupped another handful from the wellhead and drunk it, and he wiped his mouth and looked at Kale with something that was not triumph and not even anger, just the flat tiredness of a man who has finished an unpleasant job. "Pick them up and walk them back over the wall. The water's not for sale and it's not for taking, and I think you've worked out by now that you can't hold it, so there's nothing left to say. Tell your cordon the reach is settled. Tell them there's water enough down here for the whole basin and to spare, and any that wants to talk about sharing it, not taking it, sharing it, can come back under a real flag, unarmed, and I'll hear them. But you come back armed to my water again, Kale," and here, for the first time, something moved under the tiredness, something old and level and certain. "And I won't whistle twice." Kale's sidearm was still in his hand. Nea watched him look at it and look at the human, and look at the 100 watching tons of the settled reach, and she watched the clan lord of the oldest land-holding blood in the cordon holster his gun and bend, stiff, his tail dragging in the wet grass, and help his shaking regulars to their feet, and turn, and begin the long walk back down the green mile under the eyes of the beasts that had spared him, and she thought, "It is done. Whatever else happens, that is a man who will never hold power again," and every soul in the cordon just watched it end. She did not walk with him. She stood at the wellhead as the broken parley filed away down the green, and when Kale reached the edge of the cleared circle he stopped, and half-turned, and looked back, not at the human, at her, at the third-rank cartographer who had told him to go to the spring house under a flag, who had found the lever of his vanity and pulled it and put him here, in front of the whole watching cordon, on the wrong end of a mercy. She saw him understand it, all of it, the warnings west, the burst transmissions, the counsel that had seemed so wise. She saw him know, finally, who had sent the human the word to build faster. "You," Kale said, "just that." "Me," Nea agreed. And she took the cartographer's kit off her shoulder, the survey plate and the cordon seals and the whole apparatus of the wall, and she set it down in the wet green grass at the edge of the keeper's water, and she did not pick it back up. "Go home, overseer. There's nothing here that ranks you anymore. There never was. We just couldn't read the chart." Kale went. The column broke at the green line without an order. 200 regulars who had felt the walk in and seen the feed did not need to be told twice, and streamed back east toward the wall in the falling gold light, the boring rigs and the pipe carriers grinding away empty, and behind them the Viharn reach settled slowly back into its evening, the grazers returning to the wet margins, the duskrunners to the rig shade, the shrouk to the scarps, the Viharn to the standpipe cool. All of it swinging back into the quiet living order that 100 days of water had built, as though a clan lord and 200 soldiers had been no more to it than weather that had passed. Nea Sorrel stood in the middle of it with no kit and no post and no wall at her back for the first time in her life, and found that her hands, at last, were steady. The reckoning came faster than anyone west of the wall expected, because the drone feed had shown the whole cordon the one thing a clan lord's authority cannot survive, which is the sight of that authority on its knees in the grass being spared by a squatter. Drouse Kale did not last the season. His clan moved first, before the cordon inquiry even convened, because landholding blood protects itself, and the fastest way to cut a wound off a body is to sever the limb it entered by. They stripped his overseer's warrant and his landholder's collar, and settled the whole disaster onto him alone. The void charter, the failed recovery, the parley that became a mercy on the feed, and they did it in a single afternoon. And Drouse Kale went from the man who had drawn a column 200 miles to a name the clan would spend a generation not saying. Nea, when she heard, felt not triumph but a small cold pity, because she had aimed him at that spring house herself, and she had known, when she pulled the lever of his vanity, more or less where he would land. The inquiry, when it convened, could not find a crime. That was the elegant cruelty of Kale's own design turned back on him. He had built the recovery operation to be legal at every joint, and legal it remained, right up to the moment it knelt in the grass, and so there was no charge that would stick and no court that would hold. The cordon did the thing institutions do when a thing has gone catastrophically wrong within the rules. It changed the rules quietly and pretended it always had them. The injunction on the aquifer was vacated. The reclamation charter was dissolved. The Viharn Reach was reclassified, in the space of a single administrative session, from a terminal biome pending drainage to a settled range under recognized salvage title, and the recognized salvage title holder was a human named Jonah Reed. There was a great deal of language in the reclassification about regional resource stewardship and shared yield frameworks, and none of it, Nea noted, reading it later, mentioned the beasts at all, because the cordon still could not quite bring itself to write down the thing the whole basin had shown it. That the apex of the Viharn Reach was not the thing with the most teeth, that it was the thing the water came out of, and that when a rival came to take the water, the entire range would rise behind the keeper and give the challenger exactly the answer the oldest law in the world had always given. They could not write it in a statute. So they wrote it, instead, into the thing the cordon academies had always used to carry the truths the statutes could not, the field doctrine, the working knowledge passed soldier to soldier and cartographer to cartographer, the part of an institution that actually tells you how the world works. And there, in the Western Survey doctrine, appended by a third-rank cartographer who no longer held a rank and was never formally credited, was a new entry that would outlast every name in the whole affair, Kale's and the cordon's and in time even Jonah's. Read the water, not the teeth. Any range has an apex. In a dying land the apex is not the strongest jaw but the surest water. Where a keeper holds the water, the range holds the keeper, and no wall, no column, and no law will take from a keeper what the range has decided is his. Do not challenge a keeper at his own water. There is no version of that challenge you survive with your name. The Sethari regulars who had knelt in the grass carried it back over the wall in a rougher form. The form soldiers give a truth, and it spread through the cordon garrisons faster than any doctrine ever had, because 200 men had felt the walk-in and knew it in the marrow. Don't go for a keeper's water. It became a saying, then a byword, then a piece of the language, the way the deepest lessons always do. A Sethari veteran, years on, warning a young hothead off a fight he could not win, would tell him he was reaching for a keeper's water, and the young one would understand, without ever having heard the whole story, that some things have a whole range standing behind them, and you do not get to the thing without going through the range, and you do not go through the range. Jonah Reed, when Nea told him about the doctrine entry, a long while later, laughed the short laugh she had come to know, and shook his head, and said the only thing he ever said about the whole business that sounded like a verdict on it. I didn't tame a single one of them, he said. That's the part your people can't get down on paper, and it's the only part that matters. I never tamed anything. I dug a well and I didn't leave. Everything else they decided on their own. He looked out at the green, at the beasts in it. You don't command a thing that outweighs you 6-to-1, Nea. You keep the water and you don't leave and you let it decide what you are. That's not a trick. That's just, he searched for it, a plain man reaching past his own trade. That's just what it costs to be trusted by something that could kill you. You have to actually be trustworthy, all the way down. There's no faking it to a thing that reads the water in your voice. he shrugged. Turns out that's the whole secret. There isn't a better one. The first delegation to come back under a real flag came unarmed at the turn of the second season, and the envoy who led it, a grave old Sethari water factor named Asyun Vihar, had prepared for the meeting the way she prepared for every hard negotiation of a long career, which was to decide in advance what she was willing to lose. She had not prepared for the walk-in. She had seen the drone feed of the parley, as everyone in the cordon had. She had thought she understood what waited past the wall. She understood nothing until she was in it, until the transport set them down at the green line, and the 8 of them went forward on foot toward the silver spine of standpipes, unarmed, under a plain white flag, and the beasts of the Viharn Reach rose from the day heat on either side and paced them in. Asyun had held delegations under the guns of 3 clans. She had never in her life felt what she felt walking that green mile. The flat, weightless, patient attention of a whole range of apex predators deciding, moment by moment, whether the small soft things under the white flag were worth allowing near the water. By the time the spring house came in sight, the youngest of her aides was weeping silently and did not seem to know it, and Asyun Vihar, who had decided in advance what she was willing to lose, understood that she had come to this table with nothing to bargain and had better find that out now, before she embarrassed her clan by pretending otherwise. The human was at the wellhead. Of course he was. Asyun had been told he was always at the wellhead, and he was ordinary dust-dark sleeves shoved up, a socket wrench in one hand, and beside him lay the young apex from the feed, Ket, grown now past the size of any Viharn in the old surveys, a gray mountain that opened one bankcoal eye at the delegation and closed it again, unimpressed. Behind them, the water ran out of the spring house, with its sound like the valley breathing. Envoy, Jonah Reed said. He did not bow and he did not make her bow, and Asyun was old enough in the trade to know that the first was a courtesy and the second a mercy. You came unarmed. Thank you. That's the whole thing right there. Come and sit. There's water. They sat at a plank table in the spring house shade, and Asyun Vihar, water factor of 40 years, watched the human do a thing that undid every strategy she had brought, which was this. He told her yes before she had finished asking. She had come to negotiate a shared draw, a fraction of the aquifer piped east to the nearest cordon settlements, which were themselves dying slow for want of water, though a proud clan had been slow to say so. She had a whole architecture of concessions prepared, a ladder of falling asks, the ordinary machinery of a factor's work. Jonah listened to the first ask and set down his wrench. Yes, he said. How much do you need? Envoy Reed, she started. Just Jonah. And I mean it, how much do you need? Not how much can you get me down to. How much water do the eastern settlements actually need to stop dying? He was looking at her the way she had seen him look at the water on the feed, level and patient, and reading something under the surface. Because the aquifer puts back more than the whole basin drinks, Envoy. I've measured it every day for 2 years. There's water down there for the Reach and the eastern settlements and 3 more besides, if it's drawn slow and given time to recharge. And the only way to lose it is to be greedy and pull it faster than the deep table fills. So don't bargain me. Tell me the true number, and I'll tell you if the aquifer can carry it. And if it can, you'll have it, because water that just sits under the ground helping nobody is the one thing in this whole basin I've got no use for. Asyun Vihar was quiet for a long moment. In 40 years, no one had ever answered her first ask with a larger offer, and she found she did not have a maneuver for it, because it was not a maneuver. It was simply a man telling the truth about water because he did not know how to do anything else with it. She gave him the true number. He worked it against his gauges, there at the table, muttering, a plain tradesman doing sums, and told her the aquifer could carry it with room to spare if the eastern draw was metered to the recharge, and that he would help her people set the meters himself, because a badly built water system was a thing he could not in conscience allow to exist within reach of his hands. Why, Asyun said, she had to ask. It was not in any brief, it was the thing under all the briefs. You held this against a clan lord and 200 regulars. The whole cordon watched you spare Kale's life. You could name any price and my clan would pay it: land, title, a seat. You could make us kneel for this water. Why give it? Jonah Reed looked at her, and then out at the green. And then he did the thing that the old water factor carried back over the wall and could not stop thinking about. The thing that her whole grave clan of warrior merchants turned over and over until they had, in their way, made it holy. He walked to the wellhead. He crouched and cupped his bare hand under the running water, and carried it back, brimming, held level and careful the whole way so not a drop spilled. And he set his cupped hand down over the plank table in front of the old envoy and opened his fingers and let the water run out onto the wood between them. Because a wall says stay out, he said, and a well says come here, and I have spent my whole life learning to build the second thing, and it turns out the second thing is stronger. You came to my water unarmed under a flag and asked. That's all it ever takes. Anybody who comes to the water like that, open hands, no wall, gets the water. That's not generosity, envoy. That's just what water's for. He wiped his wet hand on his coveralls. Set the meter slow. Give it time to fill. And send anyone who's thirsty. Asyun Vihar went home and made her report. And in her report, because she was a factor and not a poet and had no other way to carry it, she described exactly what the human had done: the cupped hand, the water poured out on the wood between them, the open fingers, and the grave old clans of the cordon, who had built their whole civilization on the taking of water behind walls, took the gesture, and did with it what such peoples always do with a thing they cannot forget. They made it doctrine. Within a generation, no water factor of the cordon would seal a true accord any other way. The open hand, the water carried level and poured out on the table between the parties, not a drop spilled, the fingers spread to show the empty palm. They called it the open hand water, and they taught it to their young as the oldest and most binding oath there was, older than the collars, older than the walls, a promise made over shared water with nothing held back and nothing hidden, the one form of word that even an apex would honor. None of them, telling it, ever mentioned that they had learned the most sacred oath of their civilization from a squatter wiping his wet hand on his trousers, who had only meant that water is for drinking, and that a thirsty person who asks nicely should be given a drink. Naya, when the old envoy's report crossed her survey station, laughed until her eyes ran, and then she stopped laughing, because it was, when you set the ceremony aside, the truest thing the cordon had learned in 1,000 years, and it had taken a human with a well to teach it to them, and she wrote in her log that the doctrine had a name now, and it was a good name, and left it at that. The settled years had a shape to them, and the shape was work, and Jonah Reed was happy in it, the way a man is happy who has found the one place his whole trade was pointing at all along. He rose before the light and walked the channels, checking the flow the way another man checks his own pulse, and the basin woke around him as he walked, the grazers lifting out of the wet grass, the duskrunners rousing from the rig shade, the shroud unfolding on the high scarps against the graying sky. He tapped the manifold twice with the flat of his wrench before he opened the dawn flow, an old plumber's habit to seat the seal, and the beasts had long since learned the two flat knocks the way they had learned the hum, and they gathered loose and easy at the water when they heard it, and he moved among them at the wellhead without a thought, an ordinary man in a valley of apex predators, pouring the day's first water into the pans, while a thing that outweighed him 20 times lay in the mud at his hip and burred. There was a settlement now, small, on the eastern margin, where Naya's survey station had been the first stone, a scatter of slurrycrete houses, a few human salvage families drawn by the water and the word, a few Sethari who had crossed the wall to live rather than to take, a mixed and unlikely handful of people learning to share a range with 3 apex species by the one rule that made it possible, which was Jonah's rule, the only one he ever posted. Come to the water with open hands and you are welcome, and come to it any other way and the range will teach you why you shouldn't. It held. It held better than any walled town in the cordon, because everyone in it understood in the marrow exactly what stood between them and the dark, and it was not a wall. Which is why the poachers came at night, and by water, and thought themselves clever. They were a broker's crew, 6 of them off-book, in a shallow draft skiff that had come up the southern channels in the dark with muffled motors. A mixed lot of cordon-fringed types who made their living in the exotic beast trade, the fighting pits and the private menageries of the inner worlds, where a live Viharn calf was worth more than most men made in a lifetime, and a range full of unafraid, unguarded, human-habituated predators looked, on the broker's maps, like the easiest harvest in known space. They had studied the feeds. They had seen the beasts defer to the keeper. They had drawn exactly the wrong lesson from it, the same lesson Kale had drawn, dressed in different clothes. They had seen tame where there was trust, and they had come to help themselves to the trusting. They put ashore below the settlement in the deep dark and moved up toward the denning grounds where the season's calves lay, with nets and dart guns and a cull cage on a float. And they were good at their trade, quiet and quick, and they had a young Viharn darted and half into the net before the range woke to what was happening. It woke fast. Nea, who kept the settlement's watch that night, heard it start. Not a roar. The range never started with a roar, but the low rolling motor growl of the duskrunners rising all at once out of the southern grass, the sound she had heard in the gold light of the parley and had prayed she would never hear again, and she was on her feet and out the door with the alarm in her hand when the whole basin came up into the dark around her. She did not sound the alarm. She stood in her doorway and understood that there was nothing the settlement needed to do, because the thing that kept the settlement was already awake and already moving, and the 6 poachers below the denning grounds with a darted calf in a net were about to receive an education that no wall and no dart gun had prepared them for. Jonah reached the denning grounds a half-minute behind the range, and by then it was already over in every way that mattered, and it had not, quite, become the thing he had spent the walk down there dreading. The 6 poachers were alive. He counted them fast in the light of his hand lamp. 6, all 6, backed against the cull cage float with their weapons dropped and their hands up and their faces the color of old ash, ringed in the dark by the risen reach. The duskrunners in their gray tins, the shroud mantled and shrieking on the low rocks, and over them all enormous, come down out of the dark with the whole weight of the range behind him, Ket. The young apex stood between the poachers and the netted calf with his great scarred head lowered and the deep chest thunder rolling out of him, and he had not killed the 6 men because he had, in the last instant, done the thing his keeper had taught the whole range in the gold light of the parley 2 years before. He had stopped at the edge of it, and held, quivering, and waited for the whistle. Jonah did not whistle them off, not right away. He walked into the ring of his own predators, into the middle of it to the calf in the net, and he knelt in the dark and cut the net away and ran his hands over the young Viharn and found the dart and drew it and pressed his thumb to the wound, low and steady. Easy, easy, I've got you. Until the calf's breathing eased and it struggled up onto its legs and stood, groggy and furious and alive. Only then did he stand and turn and look at the 6 poachers backed against their cull cage in the ring of the risen reach, and the look on his face was the one Nea had seen exactly once before, when a clan lord had drawn a gun on the old matriarch, and it was not a look any of the 6 men would forget for as long as they lived. "You came to my water in the dark," Jonah said, "with cages for the young ones. I want you to understand what that means here, so I'm going to explain it once." He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He had never once needed to. This range has a keeper, and the keeper has a rule, and the rule is that anyone who comes with open hands gets the water. You came with nets, so the rule you're under now isn't mine. He looked deliberately at Ket, at the lowered head and the rolling thunder, at the ring of teeth in the dark. It's theirs, and the only thing standing between you and their rule right now is that I haven't walked away yet. That's it. That's the whole of what's keeping you alive. Not a wall, not a law. Just a man who hasn't decided to go back to bed. He let that sit in the dark a moment. Then he crouched and cupped a handful of water from the channel at his feet and drank it, unhurried, the way he did everything, and stood. "I'm not them," he said. "I don't take the young and I don't kill things that have quit. So here's how this goes. You leave the cages, you leave the darts and the nets and the skiff. And you walk south, out of the basin on your feet in the dark, and you tell every broker and every pit master and every menagerie on every inner world you ever sell to that the Viharn Reach is settled, and the water has a keeper, and the young ones are under the range, and anyone who comes for them had better hope to God the keeper's still awake when they do." His voice never lifted. "Because I won't always be. And when I'm not." He did not finish it, and did not need to, and behind him Ket's thunder rolled up one notch, and every man against the cull cage flinched as one. They walked, 6 poachers on foot in the dark, out of the basin, leaving everything, and the range let them go because the keeper wished it, and paced them to the southern edge the way it had paced Kale's broken parley to the wall, silent, unhurried, a lesson given in the one language that crosses every world there is. None of them ever came back. The word went where Jonah sent it, into the low places of the exotic trade where such words travel fast, and it did the work a wall could never do. It made the Viharn Reach the one range in known space where the beasts were not harvested, because the cost of the harvest was a thing the trade had run the numbers on and would not pay. "You could have let them," Nea said to him after at the wellhead in the gray before dawn, watching the rescued calf drink from the pan beside its mother. "The poachers, Ket would have. The range wanted to. You could have let them, and no one in the cordon or off it would ever have called it wrong." "I know," Jonah said. He tapped the manifold twice and opened the dawn flow, and the water ran and the basin began once more to wake. "That's exactly why I didn't. A keeper who lets the range kill when it's angry isn't a keeper anymore. He's just the biggest predator, and they'll figure that out, and then it all comes apart." He looked at her, tired, level, sure. "They don't follow the strongest thing, Nea. I keep telling your people that, and none of them can hear it. They follow the thing that keeps the water and doesn't lose its head. The day I lose my head over 6 thieves is the day I stop being worth following. So no, they walk, the young one lives, and the range learns one more time that the keeper holds the line even when he's angry." He almost smiled. "That's the whole job. Hold the water, hold the line, don't leave. Everything else takes care of itself." Nea Sorrel had set her survey kit down in the wet grass on the day of the parley, and she never went back over the wall to live. And the choice that had felt in the moment, like the end of a career, turned out to be the beginning of the only work that ever mattered to her. She built her station, and she filled it with instruments, and she did, at last, the thing she had trained her whole life to do and had never been permitted to do honestly. She read the water. She mapped the green as it ran south and west down Jonah's channels, a mile a season, then 2, then more, the dead red basin filling in from its living center like a wound closing in reverse across years. She logged the return of species the Reach had not held in her lifetime. The flocking things, the burrowing things, the small fierce things at the bottom of the web that everyone forgot were the web. She tracked the hierarchy, the real one, the one that ran on water and not on teeth, and she was the first of her people to write it down true. And in time cartographers came over the wall to study under her, young Sethari who had grown up on the doctrine she had written without her name on it. And she taught them the first thing she taught anyone, which was the 4 words she had typed into a forbidden field on the very first day, when she still had a rank and a wall, and did not yet understand a single important thing about the world. The wall is not the water. And she watched Ket grow, and that in the end was the thing that undid her more than the parley or the poachers or any of it, the slow ordinary miracle of the cull-orphaned growing up, the whole of it logged in her own careful hand across the years. She had the record of every stage. The calf that had come out from under a rock with a ruined leg and hissed at the hand that saved it. The limping shadow at the keeper's heel. the yearling that hunted its own meat and came back to burr in the mud. The young bull, plates in hard and gray, that the other young learned deference from. And then, over the seasons, the thing the Corden academies had never once let themselves imagine, because in 1,000 years of the wall they had never allowed a Viharn to live long enough for anyone to see it. Ket did not stop. He grew past the young, he grew past the grown. On full prey and clean water and the long safety the wells had bought, he grew the way no Viharn in all the Corden's careful record had ever been permitted to grow, season on season, until the ground spoke when he walked and his shadow crossed a whole pan of water at the dawn draw. And Nea, measuring him against the old pre-collapse survey figures for the range matriarch herself, found that the cull-orphaned had passed her, had grown larger in the fed years than the oldest and greatest apex the Viharn Reach had ever produced, and was growing still. The matriarch felt it before anyone. Nea was sure of that afterward, the way she was sure of most of the important things, from the water and not from any instrument. Through the 5th and 6th seasons the old female came less often to the wells, and moved slower when she came, the clouded eye grown fully blind now and the good one dimming, her great scarred bulk gone gaunt and soft with the weight of 100 years and more. She had killed 3 culling teams and a Corden gunship in her long life. She had ruled the whole dying basin from the top of a hierarchy of teeth and mass, back when teeth and mass were all the Reach had left. And she had, at the very end of it, lowered that scarred head to a human at a spring and let the whole range take the lesson. And Nea had never stopped wondering what it had cost the oldest apex in the world to do that, and had never been able to decide whether it was surrender or wisdom, and had settled in the end on the same answer she had settled on for the human, that in a thing that old, the two had become the same. She came up the main wash one evening at the turn of the 7th season, slow, the whole basin bending toward the weight of her the way it always had, and she came to the wellhead where the keeper stood, and she did not drink. She lowered herself down into the wet grass at the edge of the keeper's light, folding the great gaunt bulk of herself down joint by joint the way the very old do, and she laid the scarred head down flat in the cool mud at the edge of the water she had spent the last years of her life being kept alive by, and she let out one long, slow breath that stirred the dust. And Jonah Reed, who had been at that wellhead every dawn and every dusk for 7 years, and knew the water in every animal in the basin, set down his wrench and took off his hat and went and sat in the mud beside her scarred head, and stayed. He stayed all night. Nea watched it from the margin and did not go down, because it was not a thing to go down into. The whole range came, through the dark, one by one and then in their tens, the duskrunners and the shrouk and the young and the grown, drawn to where the old matriarch lay, and they did not growl and they did not gather in ranks. They simply came and stood and lay in the grass around the fading weight of the thing they had all, teeth or water, bowed to, and over them the wells turned slow against the stars and the water ran and ran. And in the center of it, all night, an ordinary man sat in the mud with his hat off, and his hand flat on the crown of the great scarred head, low and steady, saying the thing he had said to a dying calf under a rock 7 years before, the thing he said to every frightened thing at the end of its strength. Easy now, easy. I've got the water, I've got you. Until sometime in the last dark hour before the dawn the long, slow breathing stopped. And the oldest apex, the Viharn Reach had ever made went out of the world with a human's hand on her head, and her blind eyes turned toward the sound of the water. The range looked then for the next one. That is what a range does. Nea watched it happen in the gray of that morning, watched the whole living basin turn, as one thing, from the still bulk in the grass toward the question that a hierarchy must always answer. Who now? Who holds the top? Who does the rest give the ground to? The answer walked out of the dark of the denning grounds and came up the main wash, and the ground spoke under him, and it was Ket. He was enormous. He had come into his full growth in the years the wells had bought, and there was nothing in the basin, nothing in the record, nothing in all the Corden's 1,000 years of the wall that had ever been his size, a gray armored mountain that made the old matriarch in her prime look like the young thing he had once been. And he came up the wash through the gathered range, and every beast in the basin drew back its head and gave him the ground, because he was, past any question of teeth or mass or water, the apex now. The largest and strongest living thing in the whole of the Viharn reach. And Ket came up the wash, through the range that yielded to him, past the still bulk of the old matriarch in the grass, to the wellhead where the keeper stood, and he lowered the vast gray mountain of himself down into the mud at the human's feet, and he laid his enormous scarred head over on its side against the man's chest the way he had done when he was the size of a hound and half dead under a rock, and he burred the low double-knock chest sound, ket-ket, the sound the flushing pump made when it primed. The sound the man had named him for on the second night of the world, and every beast in the Viharn reach watched the largest and strongest living thing any of them would ever see lay its head against an ordinary human and make the sound a calf makes to the thing that saved it. And took the last lesson, the deepest one, the one that no wall and no chart of teeth and mass could ever hold. The apex of the Viharn reach lay at the keeper's feet, and the keeper stood, ordinary and dust-dark and tired, with his hand flat on the crown of the great gray head and the water running out of the springhouse behind him, and he was not the strongest thing in the basin, and he never had been, and it had never once, from the fourth day to that morning, made the slightest difference to a single animal in the range. "Easy," Jonah said, low and steady, to the mountain at his feet. "Easy now, I know, I've got the water. I've got you." The Viharn reach became, over the years that followed, a word that meant something across the whole cordon, and then past it, and the meaning of the word changed depending on who said it. To the eastern settlements it meant water, the metered draw Jonah had set with his own hands, running slow and steady down the pipe he had helped them lay, filling cisterns in towns that had been dying quiet for a generation, so that a whole belt of the cordon's dry frontier came back to life, in the wake of one basin, the way the basin had come back in the wake of one well. To the water factors it meant the open-hand water, the oath they now swore over poured water with empty palms, never knowing they had learned it from a man wiping his hands on his trousers. To the garrison soldiers it meant the byword their veterans used to warn the young off unwinnable fights, reaching for a keeper's water, a phrase that had traveled so far from its source that most who said it had never heard of a human at all. And to the cartographers, the ones Nea trained and the ones who trained under them, it meant the doctrine, the real one, the overturning of the 1,000-year chart. Read the water, not the teeth. But to the ordinary people of 100 worlds who heard the story third hand and fourth hand, in the way stories travel, stripped of the names and worn down to the shape, it meant something larger and simpler and truer than any of the doctrines. And it was the thing that made them, when they heard it, go quiet for a moment, and then want to tell someone else. It meant that a single human being had walked, alone with nothing but a drill and a stubborn hand, into a place the whole civilized galaxy had certified as a grave, a place ruled by 3 apex predators, fenced off to die, written into the academy books as past all saving, and had not conquered it, and had not tamed it, and had not fought it. He had dug a well. He had brought the water back and given it to everything that lived there, the prey and the predators both, and he had stayed, and he had been trustworthy all the way down, and in return a whole range of things that could have killed him with a thought had made him their apex, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the surest, because he was the one the water came out of and the one who would not leave. And when a clan lord with an army and the law had come to take the water, every predator in that dead-certified basin had risen behind the small, soft human at the spring and given the challenger the oldest answer in the world. And then the human had called them off astride before the kill, because a keeper holds the line even when he is angry, and that was the part of the story that traveled furthest of all, because it was the part that was hardest to fake and easiest to know was true. Humans, the story came to mean on 100 worlds. That is a thing a human will do, not take a place, not tame it, make it live and stay and be worth following until the very things that should have eaten him would sooner die than let him be harmed. The galaxy had a long list of the ways a species could be dangerous. It had counted teeth and mass and fleets and guns, the way the cordon had counted teeth and mass at the wall, and by that count humans had never ranked especially high. The Viharn Reach added a line to the list that none of the old counts had a column for, and it was the line that made the careful old civilizations of the wall, reading it, feel a cool touch of something they could not quite name. Give a human water and time and a dying thing under a rock, and he will not conquer your grave. He will make it a garden, and every apex in it will lie down at his feet, and there is no wall you can build, and no law you can write, and no army you can send that will take from that man what the whole living world has decided is his. Drouse Kale lived to hear it. That was, Nea thought, the last and cleanest turn of the whole thing, and she did not gloat over it, and neither did Jonah, but neither of them pretended it was not just. Stripped of his collar and his warrant, settled with the whole disaster, the once clanlord had drifted to the fringe the way broken men do, and he had ended, by the accounts that came back, in one of the very eastern settlements that Jonah's metered water had saved, living out his days in a town that would have died without the keeper's well, drinking, every day of his life, the water of the man he had come to destroy. He never came back to the Reach. He never came to the water with open hands and asked, though the offer stood, "Pride is the one thirst the open-hand water cannot slake." But he lived on the humans' water all the same, because everyone in the East did, and there is no loss of face in all the long history of the cordon's proud clans to match that one. To spend your last years kept alive, anonymous and unforgiven, by the mercy of the squatter who spared you in the grass, and to know that the whole galaxy tells the story and does not even bother anymore to say your name. Jonah Reed did not change. That was the thing Nea loved best about him, across all the years, and the thing she understood last, that the story got larger and the man stayed exactly the size he had always been. He did not build a hall or take a title or sit for the delegations that came in time from worlds she had to look up on the charts. He rose before the light and walked the channels and checked the flow the way a man checks his own pulse. He tapped the manifold twice and opened the dawn draw. He fixed what broke and deepened what needed deepening and taught anyone who asked how to read the water. And he grew older at his wellhead in his stained coveralls with a socket wrench in his hand and a gray mountain sleeping at his hip. An ordinary man who had done the one thing his whole trade had always been pointing at, and wanted nothing more than to keep doing it well. "They'll make you into something after you're gone," Nea told him once near the end, when the gray was coming into his own hair and Ket had scars of his own and the settlement had grandchildren in it. "You know that. They already half have. 100 worlds telling it. They'll make you a legend." "Let them," Jonah said. He tapped the manifold twice and opened the flow, and the water ran and the basin began one more time to wake. "A legend's just a well somebody's still drinking from after the man who dug it is gone. I don't mind being that." He looked out at the green running south and west as far as the eye could go, a living world where a grave had been. "Long as the water keeps coming. That's the only part I ever cared about. The water keeps coming. There is a thing the settlement children learned to watch for in the last years, and the newcomers were always told about it before they saw it, because a person ought to be warned the first time, or the sight of it will stop the heart. It happened at the dawn draw and again at dusk, when the keeper walked his ground. He came out of the low crete house by the wellhead in the gray before the light. An old man now, gray-haired, moving slower than he had but moving all the same, in the same stained coveralls, with the same socket wrench in his hand, and he walked the channels the way he had walked them for a lifetime, checking the flow. And the whole living weight of the Viharn Reach, the largest and most dangerous assembly of apex predators on any settled world in the cordon, 3 species and their young, and all the fierce-fed generations the wells had made, the whole of it drew back to let him pass. That was the thing. That was what the newcomers were warned about and never quite believed until they saw it. The duskrunners in the grass rose and drew their heads aside. The shrouk on the low rocks folded their membranes and gave the ground. The Viharn, the armored mountains, the things that made the earth speak when they moved, the Viharn stood, wherever the keeper's path would take him, and stepped back, and lowered their great scarred heads, and opened a clean wide lane through the middle of the most lethal range in known space, so that one ordinary old man could walk down it to check his water in the gray light, unhurried, unarmed, humming the low four-note breath that every animal in the basin had known since before it opened its eyes. A human had entered monster territory alone. He had come with a drill and a stubborn hand into a place the whole galaxy had certified as a grave, ruled by things that should have killed him in an afternoon. And what he built, not a wall, never a wall, a well, and a system, and a living world, and above all a trust that went all the way down and never once cracked. What he built had made every predator in that territory step back and give him the road for the rest of his life at every dawn and every dusk, without his ever once asking them to. He was never their master. Nea had spent a lifetime getting her own people to understand that and mostly failed and made her peace with the failing. He did not command them. He had no whip and no cage and no throne. And on the day he raised his voice or lost his head or reached for the strongest thing kind of power, it would all have come apart, and he knew it, and so he never did. He kept the water and he held the line and he did not leave, and the range gave him the only kind of allegiance that is worth anything, which is the kind that is freely given by a thing that could refuse and does not. On the last morning, and Nea was there for it, old herself by then, come down from her station as she came every dawn, to sit at the margin and read the water and watch the keeper walk his ground. On the last morning he came out slower than usual, and Ket came with him. Ket was old now too in his way, though a Viharn grown in fed years on clean water, aged like the mountains he resembled, slow and enormous and gray. He had been the apex of the Viharn reach for a lifetime, the largest living thing any of them would ever see, and he walked at the old man's hip down the cleared lane through the risen range the way he had walked there when he was the size of a hound with a mending leg, a gray shadow that had never once, in all his years and all his strength, forgotten the hand that pulled him out from under a rock and gave him water and said, "Easy, I've got you." They walked the channel together in the gray light, the old man and the old apex, and the range drew back on either side and gave them the road. And at the wellhead the keeper stopped, and looked out at the green running south and west as far as the light would reach, a whole living world where a grave had been, and he tapped the manifold twice with the flat of his wrench, the way he had every dawn of his life, to seat the seal. And he opened the flow. The water came up cold and endless out of the deep aquifer he had found where the whole cordon swore there was none, and it ran out into the pans and down the lined channels, and out across the living basin the way it had run for a lifetime. And the beasts of the Viharn reach came loose and easy to the dawn draw, and the old man stood at the head of his water with his hand resting on the crown of the great gray head beside him, and watched the thing he had built take another breath. "There," Jonah Reed said, low and steady, to the water, to the range, to the mountain at his side, to the whole living world he had pulled up out of the ground with his hands. "There it is. The water keeps coming." His hand moved once, gentle, on the old apex's scarred crown. "Easy now, I've got it. I've got you, I'm not going anywhere." He never did. When he went the way the matriarch had gone, at the water in the night, with the whole range gathered around and a great gray head laid against his chest, and they buried him where he fell, at the wellhead, under the low crete of the spring house, and the water ran over the deep place where he lay and never stopped. It never stopped. That was the ending, and it was the only ending he would have wanted, and Nea wrote it in her log in her old careful hand and did not weep, because it was not a thing to weep over. The keeper was gone and the water kept coming. Ket held the range to the end of his own long years, and after him his own Get held it, generation on generation, and the lane still opened at dawn and dusk for a keeper who was no longer there to walk it. Out of a memory the range never let go of, and never fully passed on, and never needed to explain. The green ran south and west and did not brown. The eastern settlements drank and lived. The open-hand water was sworn on 100 worlds. And the doctrine held, the true one, the one a broken cartographer had written into a forbidden field on the first day of the whole story, and spent a lifetime proving. The wall is not the water, the apex is not the strongest jaw. It is the surest water, and the hand that will not leave, and there is nothing in all the counted strength of the galaxy that can take from such a hand what the whole living world has freely laid at its feet. A human walked into monster territory alone, and what he built made every predator back away and then lie down and give him the road and keep the water coming long after the man was gone. That is the whole of it. There is no better secret. There isn't one at all.